Good grief, sea of sludge, the éco-anxiété sonnets. Continuum of extra quantity of, Louisiana is more than, ecology annals ill, ekphrasis, knuckled, winter. Is it Imani? Information is matched by, naming his place is, the vegetation that holds, sediment together to land, Jacqueline Brown's research practice. Summer 2022. Grief Stasi. Homework art that is, it's diurnal. I'm scared of big buildings. Is referred to as the and its grease stiff. Aim for the German in addition to French and, since the 1930s, thousands of square miles of wetlands, earth, which was exhibited at the Berlin Biennale in Spanish. When conquered the land it have disintegrated into the sea. Trench, defile. A small cut on my right forefinger, the finger I use, longitudinal walking that, a performative, German coast blamed, corset of plantations, to swipe over the images, from Brown's work on my reiteration, the sheer material that constrain the Mississippi, rivers fertile, phone bothers me much. The large photograph of information in this video, flow, it is known as a small tailings pond made famous by Edward her steely gaze, animation, videography, photography, and sound. Infamous for producing the most toxic air in the US, I'm happy the film White Noise, East Palestine, Weston, Curtis, Steichen, he slide in my were captured by Brown via canoe, foot, car, is known as Cancer Alley. At uns it finger is the same red color as Bratinsky's tailing. 3-passenger plane in Louisiana is heavily known to 24 indigenous nations as pound, ost of the new, words added to the French, industrialized coastal, wetlands in 2022, GIS, only water your orchid, provides a persistent bobancha, meaning land, of many languages, convulsive, big, gulp, gulf, guelph. Dictionaries in 2022 have flagger tape as Eve Klein Blue. To do with the COVID digital identifier once a week, lines and points representing pipelines, his metaleptic scramble to a higher diegetic level. How much longer will this land be known in the, including COVID and confinement, and with the climate crisis, including éco-anxiété and fakes constructing a coherent critical account of them impossible? Canals and wells were orsed from the Louisiana coastal wetlands of the U.S. Tate of Lil Weezy, the Verdissement d'Image, according to a July 26, animated by the artist. Scatolite images were fossil fuel industry reigns as to the extractive Lagos, Port Lagoon, suppleness of language, online. And after source from Google Earth 2022, apps were sorcery and landscapes of settler colonialism and slavery passing through a narrow defile. The U.S. Public Land Survey System, PLS, says oil and corporations have dredged 10,000 miles of, tells us we suddenly emerge upon a 1830 to 1860 first U.S. system to canals to drill and access 90,000 wells. Which piece of high ground? The forest brings me peace, but there's nowhere to charge my Tesla. Where the path divides and plat or divide indigenous territory into private, connect through 50,000 miles in pipeline to over the finest prospects, open property, drawing the blueprints for the 200 plants in the petrochemical corridor. This invasive infrastructure severs the integrity of, up on every side. We find ourselves in the full media in 1975 in the New York bite off Sandy Hook, water and tailings, scourging 6 miles of Trade Center turned to daylight of a sudden discovery, and SO2 E01 of beachy sludge was creative by solid waste, the big collapse when Hazeltine Creek and word of the geologist ending up in Quesnel, the 1970s TV show Barney Miller, a man enters and city politicians, including the governor, for matter from sewage that pumped into the ocean lake near Williams Lake in northern BC. Air hat which has been or suicide bombing suggests may be inherited any property. A more radical act even than police station wearing a long raincoat wants to. Wolves and grizzlies are delisted. Women in France and Kuwait for fur. Fell out of, including from the then recently completed world. Landlord Wayne had invested in Bray X before a helicopter near a litany of crimes, including corruption and especially land, which devolves by right of inheritance. Signed out a complaint against New York State pollution, though. The purposes of this goldfields of Indonesia, absolutely no oddball he is. I want to work out but he was a skilled humor. The police are psychoanalytic. They were on a panel. Basins creeping sludge. Implications of, on the one, workers' compulsive gulp. Sympathetic, they are happy after it's gone. Dealing with audits from which, the plumber tells, the IRS and a held with Brown's more hand such an act in analytic approach. 3 of Antigonous variations, Placer Dome, Jaggy. Discussion with Jaggy confronted him with the sing and a flack from them is emitting ocean, malfunctioning toilet, water, which is brown. The engineers who worked Columbia were disciplined. On the Mount Poly Gold, 1 at the Mar Copper mine, ongoing spills from copper occurred in early hours of mines in the Philippines. Take off his raincoat, which detective asks the man if he does, revealing he is hot, and suggests he, 8 years after the August and copper mine in beach of the Eric Dolphy detonator, and is going to blow up the police station levied against the company's 96 when a mine tailings containment pit collapsed. Strapped dynamite around his waist, ease a tailing pond, air Renault, criminal or civil charges, Black River flowing. I'll need another, when I came across your mention of the Mar Copper in Marinduque, written about the island in an essay which has been translated to Filipino especially since I've spent some of my childhood there. The death of the river from Mar Copper's toxic spill changed the socioeconomic relatives there, and a lot of 4 million metric tons completely filling. Then were forced to move back to Manila out of frustration with local government's inability to destruction. A sea of sludge is off the coast of Long Island, he tells Barney, and it's headed this way. There was indeed a sea of sludge, as was called in the popular. Them were forced to move back to we're in this godforsaken, out of frustration, built this causeway with local government, a authority, or notice, just dump the tailings into Kalankan Bay. Geoscientists find Todd Martin, senior geotechnician, could call it 5 clicks out. Tailings into Kalankan Bay. Arton, senior engineer, Laura Teven Rice for 226,500. The mines, earth and dam released 24 billion cubic meters of country. Who's going to geotechnical find Todd Martin into the bay? And why? Square kilometers. And yes, was grief a hormone? So-called coral bottom of the bay, covered in tailings. The locals did rely bay for their food. Years after being so by government author, did help set up a local sustainability. Dispossessed villagers could compete, or like staged die-ins. When a mine spill is compared to Olympic-sized swimming pools, as in the Mount Poly mine tailing spill was the equivalent of 9,800 Olympic-sized swimming pools, there is an assurance, I guess, that not only do we know what that pool size is, roughly, and further that we do not immediately think of swimming in a toxic sludge of minerals and 1,600 feet wide, or a wildfire on South Korea's coast is the size of 1,000 football fields, and in some cases we might der how useful a mental image of 9,800 Olympic-sized swimming alls or 20,000 football elds is, and further how any Olympic-sized swimming pools or units 9,800 Olympic-sized swimming pools could fit to, on the one hand, one football field, or in both. Aaron, sad before it's gone. Mark making Bernadette fan. Capacity would take 826 flights, or roughly 8 million flights in total, to ferry the contaminated water, unless that is the 1,600-foot wide asteroid the size of a football field. Currently, the morning of an iceberg melted to a human scale, March 12, 2022, exactly 2 years after the beginning of the pandemic, being tracked by NASA, should strike one of the AT-802F Fireboss amphibious air tankers. He first Noon Riser, Vancouver Hen Mine, comedy, spill is compared to non-fiction, Olympic-sized swimming, seen on West, pools as in the Mount. How close are Poly Mine tailing spill? The forest fires? Laughter. 9,800 Olympic-sized. Act 2, swimming there is, East Coast small, and assurance, I guess, that community theater, the polluted waters of the real, but can we get that pool size is roughly a reservation, and further that we do not, for the place, immediately think of with floating seats, swimming in a toxic floating sludge of minerals and cases, 20,000 football fields, and finally whether the mine tailing spill of roughly 9,800 Olympic-sized swimming pools could have been airlifted or even sent by tanker from northern British Columbia to the east coast of South Korea, admittedly, some 7 years and 7 months later, to help extinguish the forest fire. A water tanker, even that an Olympic-sized Chinese balloon shot down Feb 4, was the size of 2 or 3 city buses. Second, shot down Feb 10, was the size of a small car. You are brewing tea like guilt and forcing us to take sips of it. Metals left over after copper and gold have been removed. Olympic-sized swimming pools is a liquid volume equivalent to football fields for distance or two-dimensional space, as in NASA is currently tracking an asteroid the size of a football field. It is book instead. You know what I say when I hear to people when I hear they're writing anti-war books? I say, why don't you write an anti-glacier book instead? Swimming pool holds when managers grieve. Roughly 2.5 million liters, and a forest fire-fighting flying water tanker, for example, the 10 air tracker AT-802F Fireboss amphibious air tankers commonly used in British Columbia, can scoop up 3,025 liters of water in 15 seconds. Each pool's